Up for one Thursday, right?
Legislative stuff if we get time.
Okay.
The first Thursday and the third Thursday.
Remind me to write myself a note when we get over there.
I've got a card, I can give it to you. Over there.
Okay. Good evening, council and citizens that may be watching from home tonight. We're having a work session concerning the 2013 preliminary budget. And if we have time, and I'm not sure we will because the budget's kind of complicated, we'll talk about legislative issues. So Randy, if you want to kick this off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this evening's work session is to provide a preliminary overview of the budget situation that the city is facing as we move towards FY 2013. I'll also speak briefly about the situation the school division finds itself in as well. We have traditionally had these briefings early on so that if council had specific items of interest in the development of the manager's recommended budget, they could articulate that. We also will be asking and opening the floor for citizens that may have comments pre-budget deliberation and construction to lend their voice to the issues that affect us as well. Council members, you will note at your place a hard copy of an item that was in your package. It is marked revised, and I'll go over the revision. It was made earlier today. What I'd like to do is to sort of walk you through this, and if you could, let me get through it. That might be the best to take questions at the end unless I've really omitted something that is important for the understanding going forward, if that's all right. 2013, again, that is the budget that will begin July 1st. I think you're one slide ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, thank you.
Sorry.
As council is aware, and as we have talked about as recently as October and in depth at your retreat last July and countless times before that, 2013 is our fifth consecutive recession budget. The first began mid-year. The other four, including the one we're planning for now, are ones that we actually construct in a recessionary environment. 2013 promises challenges to us, almost all of which were outlined for you in July. They weren't all quantified because we didn't know the numbers at that time, but we're here to give you an initial preliminary estimate of some of those factors this evening. And I would note for you that 2014 promises to hold more of the same. The same types of issues that confront us in 13 will be confronting us in 14. There is at your place a separate handout, which I won't go over in detail, but it is a handout from the Planning District Commission that made a presentation last week at their meeting. I represented the city at that meeting, and while I commend the entire document for your reading, there are a couple of things, and you don't need to go to this, Teresa, although we have this if you'd like to put it up. Page 11 is something I wanted to specifically point out, and this is talking about employment at Hampton Roads, because we're not only in a Poquoson recession, we're in a Hampton Roads recession, which is a Virginia recession, which is really mirroring a national recession. And Teresa is ready to go. The reason to show page 11 is to really talk about the impact of recession on our citizens, on our businesses. What it will show you is their projection. Numbered page 11, please, Teresa.
Sorry.
What it shows you on page 11 is a projection of where we are now and the employment losses we've seen since the recession began. The black dotted line is if we had the best year in job growth that Hampton Roads has seen since they started keeping statistics. It would take 3 of those years in a row to get back to pre-recessionary employment levels in Hampton Roads. If you take the average, and we're not at the average now, but if you take the average, you'll see it goes out to 2021 before we get back as a region to historic employment levels. This will be compounded by the upcoming federal defense cuts, if in fact they come the way that many of us think they're going to. And I point that out simply to say that this isn't really a discussion only about 13. It's not really even a discussion about 13 and 14. It's a discussion about the fiscal situation we'll find ourselves in for the foreseeable future. The other chart to just point out to you, to get short turn for a moment, is the last numbered slide, 18, which talks about how we did in 2011 in Hampton Roads this calendar year, and the projections of the PDC economic staff for the upcoming year. And what you'll see, with some variation, is much of the same. There are some things that are changing, but the point to show you this slide is that there is no revolutionary change for the better that is forecast, and that's the situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you, Teresa. That whole presentation is worth reading when you have time. It mixes Hampton Roads statistics with national statistics, and is both enlightening and sobering. For the city, when I say city, I mean the city government, because I'll say city and schools. I realize we're all in it together, but just shorthand speak. City, we're experiencing a gap, and this is preliminary. It will likely go up, not down. As we go through the various departments' budgets, we get our shared services budget, the jail budget, and things like that. But we're looking at a gap between our ongoing revenues, recurring revenues, and our recurring expenses at the base level of approximately $2 million. The school system is looking at a budget problem which constitutes both a reduction in funding and an increase in the VRS costs and other things. So it's not always a reduction. Sometimes it's an unfunded mandate. Their state number is about $1 million, and there are certainly other components to the school's budget. They are working that through. But I think it's very easy to say that the challenge that they face exceeds $1 million. So as a city combined with the schools, as we go into this, we're looking at a $3 million problem with which to work. The major items, and there's some revisions, and I'll speak to them as we go through from what you'd seen earlier. Here are the major drivers that constitute the vast majority of that $2 million number that you saw on the previous page. Increased debt service. You'll recall there was a decision made previously that bought us some time in terms of a payment holiday or a reduction in payments for a limited time, which would then rise in the future. This is the year in which they begin to rise substantially. The first item, just under $400,000, represents the general government portion, even though it's all general obligation debt of that. The second is utility debt service fund, our increases, similar rationale, similar reasoning, similar timing. Those two items taken together are about $650,000. There is, and you're well aware of this, every one of the city's self-supporting funds, meaning the Parks Fund, the Utilities Fund, the Solid Waste Fund, the EDA Fund, are in structural deficit. Given that the structural deficit that they are forecast for the upcoming year, if we do nothing on the expenditure or revenue side, the general fund will need to absorb $536,000 worth of impact from those funds or to those funds in order to continue business as usual. So all of this is based on business as usual. We'll talk about changing business as usual a little bit later. The self-supporting funds, that's a recurring number. It changes a bit, but we haven't seen it improve over the years as we've kept fee increases down. Increasingly, the general fund has been a donor to the self-supporting funds. It's been a donor from its one-time funds, from its fund balance. As you'll see a little bit later, that fund balance is finite. So that's an issue that drives that $2 million. Additionally, and this is an estimate, and it's not based on any written quote that we've gotten from our insurance company. That's the employer share of the health insurance increase if we maintain the 80-20 split that we have traditionally. That number will change. We don't know if it's going to change up or down. We're hopeful for down, but because we don't have it, we put it in at this placeholder of a number. Of all the things we've talked about so far, only one of them, this one, is natural revenue growth. But our natural revenue growth, keep in mind we're in the 5th year of a recession, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 to go against these operating costs. So you can see that from an ongoing revenue standpoint, we're not growing our way out of our problems at a rate sufficient to net out. Lastly, on this slide, Council will recall in the adoption of the current budget and actions subsequent to the adoption of this year's budget, the school and city operational budgets are being supported by a little more than $500,000 of one-time fund balance money. So in the absence of ongoing money, the council chose to substitute money from your savings account. And so that's in this year's budget. That rolls forward to next year. Unless we make a reduction in level of service or a reduction in funding commitment to the schools or have some other revenue answer to the question. There are probably infinite strategies. What I try to lay out here is the 6 general strategies in dealing with problems like this. And they're in no particular order, and they're certainly not in recommended order. First is a general property tax increase. If your base expenditures are outpacing your base revenues, at some point you're going to have to raise revenue. That's option 1. Again, not recommendations and in no particular order. 2 is a reduction in services. Another way to bring that budget into alignment is to go into our budget and reduce it. 3 is to increase fees that support the specific self-supporting funds. Talk a little bit more about that one. 4, non-programmatic changes. Keep in mind, we've been tucking in the edges on our budget for 4 years. There's not much left to tuck under, but that doesn't mean that we won't keep trying to find things that we can further reduce. 5 is natural revenue growth. 6 is use of fund balance. And I'll talk more about each strategies 3 through 6 in a moment. But obviously, at least in my mind, options 1 and 2 are not the things you go to first. They're the things you go to last if you have to go at all. So over the next several weeks, we will be focusing on the strategies numbered 3 through 6. Teresa, if you could go to the next page, please. If you'll recall, I'm just using the same strategy numbers. Strategy 3 was to correct an imbalance in the self-supporting funds. We have tried very hard as a city to limit fee increases as well as general tax increases, and we have used general fund one-time money to offset cost increases in these funds, including debt service for the utility fund. We are rapidly running out of capacity to do that. I would argue that we have run out of capacity to do that. Every self-supporting fund, as I said, is in structural deficit. You'll recall we talked about that in July. We talked about that with you in October. So this is not something that's new to us. It's something that we knew was happening, and we've tried our best over the years to limit increases in any of those fees. And again, we'll have the same basic option. We can either increase revenue or decrease expenditure. And we'll explore that more as the budget is put together. The third bullet here, really talked about it. As you'll see in a moment, the general fund does not have the capacity to continue to write checks to the self-supporting funds if we are to have government at a level similar to we have now without significant tax increases or major changes in governmental services. Lastly, as I develop the budget, which we'll present to you in a couple of months, I will present a specific plan that does not include general property tax increases to balance every one of these funds. I believe that one of the things that we can do as we approach the 13, 14, 15 is first get our self-supporting funds in order. That's an important aspect. Based on the numbers here, it has a continuing impact through all of the budgets at about $550,000. So failure to do that means that we'll have a perpetuating $550,000 claim check on the general fund if we do not reduce expenses in those funds. The strategy 4 it relates to non-programmatic reductions. One of the things that this city has considered and done in the past, and one of the things that confronts us today on that list is rising debt service costs. The city has successfully used both restructuring of debt and refinancing to a lower rate over the past several years to balance its way through the recession thus far. We have worked with Davenport, Teresa and I continue to work with Davenport, to look at two types of options for both our general debt and our utility debt. And those two options are, one, looking for refinancing opportunities to take advantage of very low interest rates so that we can take advantage of those savings upfront, meaning take them first year, second year, as a way to mitigate our climb into this debt service increase. It's not a long-term solution, but it may buy us some short-term time. Additionally, I've asked David Rose to look at the option simply so that we can see it, of restructuring our debt within the confines of your adopted fiscal management policy. But if we restructured our debt to the most favorable possible manner in terms of payout schedule. Now, to differentiate between the two, refinancing to a lower interest rate is saving you money and you're taking advantage of that savings up front. The option to restructure may also have a refinancing component, but it may well have a back-end cost that's greater than your cost now. I don't know if either of those two sets of options will be palatable. We will bring them to you once we get them from Davenport. But in the face of $650,000 of increased debt service cost in the coming year, that in and of itself exceeds our natural revenue growth by a factor of 6, we're leaving no stone unturned there. We continue to look for ways to save money. As I said, we've been tucking the corners in for 4 years already. One of the things we're looking at now is fleet maintenance with Tom Petty's retirement, whether or not we can structure that in a different way to save some amount of money. We were doing it as recently as 4:30 this afternoon, Teresa and I going back through each budget and taking just out anything we could find that we thought we could live without, even for a short period of time. It's not a long list. As I said, we've been doing this for years, but we haven't stopped looking. Also, you can anticipate that the budget that you will see, which is similar to the budgets you've seen the past several years, will include no new requests and no new requests for any pay increases. This is a perpetuation of the base budget with those other factors worked into it. The fifth strategy is something that is more and more something that we're spending time on, and that is economic development. Barring an abrupt change to our fiscal environment, we're either going to lower the budget or we're going to raise taxes unless we can find another alternative. Economic development is where we're putting our focus. The thought is that new tax dollars are dollars that don't come from either a tax increase or a service level reduction. And we're trying hard, and I think that our efforts are paying off. You may recall recently an article in the Daily Press. They were talking about all the restaurants that were closing. And some of us were remarking that same week that we had been to several ribbon cuttings in Poquoson for restaurants. So I won't say that is totally a result of our efforts, but it is a community effort and a community focus on economic development. And we're going to keep trying to do that because it is the best of the options, if the options are tax increase, service reduction, or new money through economic development, in my opinion. Lastly, and this is an option that the city has used previously, including, as previously stated, in the current year's budget, there is more than $500,000 of one-time money supporting operating expenses in both the schools and the general fund. We're fortunate. When the city went into this recession, the city, as you know, I'm telling you stuff that you already know, the city's fund balance was in a precarious position. We hadn't anticipated fully the impacts of the recession, and it hit us like a Mack truck. We have seen this coming for a while. We have worked in this environment. We're getting pretty good at tucking the corners in and saying no to new requests. We've changed the culture. Along the way, we've saved some money. We're now, as we plan the 5th year of the recession, we've yet to have a general property tax increase. We have had few fee increases, and we've been able to reduce staff and to tuck the corners in without a significant noticeable reduction in service for our citizens. We are working more efficiently than we ever have, and the situation forced us to. We've also saved some money. Our fund balance currently stands, as you see in the bottom there, almost $1.1 million over the 15%, 12 to 15% adopted guideline of the council. That's, well, I'll say 1.1 million. I recognize it's not, but $1.1 million over that. That is an option that you have, that we have, in dealing with the budget that confronts us. And as I would note, the current budget, it's over $500,000. If you could go to the next slide and then pull out the pie chart for me. We continue to preach, save money where you can, and the money that we've accumulated in that fund balance comes as a result almost exclusively of savings on the expenditure side of the budget. We've not seen significant increases in revenue over what we've budgeted. We have been, particularly the public safety departments, have been very frugal, and we have saved money, and that has helped us to sort of replenish that fund balance. We'll continue to do that. Teresa's going to show you this slide, which I asked her to put together. She showed it to me today, and here's, I work better sometimes if I can see a picture.
Sorry, hang on just a minute.
As we talk about the prospect of using potentially the general fund balance to fill the operating hole in the budget at that amount, which is akin to $1.1 million. We all know that that's a one-time strategy. If we pull that down to 15%, that there's no guarantee it's going to go up. In this recessionary environment, it may further go down. We're one storm away from it going down. But if we use that amount of money, that's what the 2014 budget would sort of look like at its beginning. The red number, the red pie, is the city's budget minus transfers out, which includes transfers out for debt and schools. And that's the portion, that would be, that's the wedge that the fund balance could fill if we used it to the 15% level in the first year. And that's the amount of wedge we would have to replace to begin business as usual the following year before we had further increases in debt service, which are already planned, and before the recession hit us further, and before health insurance, and before the General Assembly took their crack at us. This is, to me, that's, it's just, a picture's worth 1,000 words. We would have to do significant things. So what we'll have to decide, and ultimately you will have to decide, is given the prospect that we're looking at a long time recession, how much of this do we want to begin to correct now? And how much of our savings do we want to use to buy us time in hopes that things will improve? You know, we talked before, and I may have missed it on the list in terms of unfunded mandates. I think I might have. But I'm not sure where it is. I'm sorry.
No, that's,
Unfunded mandates on this second page.
Yep.
Come back to it for a moment. In Poquoson, like lots of other places in Virginia, both our school system and our local government is taking on water at a rate faster than we can bail. And a significant part of that, the number, and I'm rounding, of problem between the school system and ourselves is about $3 million. The impact of the state's budget on us next year collectively is roughly half of that. It's about $1 million for the schools. It's more than $400,000 for us. If you round it up to 1.5 for a minute, their impacts are hitting us to include TMDL and other things. They're hitting us at a rate of more than 15 times our natural revenue growth. That's what I mean by they're adding water faster than we can bail. And I'm not sure I made that point before. Talked about this a little bit, but the school division superintendent's working on her budget now. The superintendents are always hamstrung to a bit because they have to wait on the governor's budget to really begin their process in earnest, although they began many months before. But what superintendent has identified again is an impact on the state budget on their budget of slightly less than $1 million, plus other impacts on their budget which they're still working through. Is this a significant thing? As you recall, they've already reduced their budget by more than $3 million already, and they, like us, are facing recession year 5, with no realistic end in sight, at least in the short term. There are a couple of other issues before we get to the calendar that I wanted to bring up in case the council had direction or look for a reaction. Several of you have talked to me over the past several months about a desire to look at a plan to gradually lower our tax rate on boats, given the fact that we are a community full of watermen with a culture of the water, with a recreational amenity structure focused on the water. And I won't say we're unique in that regard, but we are in very select company. So the idea here, and it's something that I plan to put in my budget for your consideration, is to gradually take the rate down as our base of boats increases, meaning it would be revenue neutral. But as more boats with higher values come to the city, gradually take the rate down until such time that the rate, which is currently at $1.50, drops to 75 cents or thereabouts, at which point the yield would continue to go up. The idea would be make a small reduction in the upcoming year and make no further reductions until the base has grown. If it doesn't grow, the rate doesn't change. If it does grow, the rate could potentially change at the rate of that growth until we got to a certain point. And so that's something that I'll be putting forward for your consideration in the budget. I don't really need your guidance on that unless the council as a group just doesn't want to see that in the budget. The other item, and I really am looking for some guidance here, we have gotten frequent communication over the Christmas holiday from citizens of Poquoson who participate in the Virginia Cooperative Extension Program's Master Gardener Program. And they have advocated for Poquoson's reaffiliation with that program. Once we began to hear from them, we contacted York County first to find out if it was possible. The answer is yes. Second, find out what it would cost, and you'll see it there, $7,500 per year. And we have requested a detailed list of those services that would be available to our citizens and businesses if we reaffiliated. We haven't gotten that list. What the request has been made more than a week ago, and we're just waiting on that. So if this is something that the council would like to see in the recommended budget, I would be pleased to put it there for your consideration, noting that it will have to push out something else. But if that's your expectation, I would actually appreciate some guidance on that, because as a general rule, not as a general rule, as a rule, it was my intention to put no new programs in the budget as we struggle to find money to support the ones that we have.
I have a question, Randy.
Yes, sir.
There's not a zero thing up there, is it?
You mean, should it be $7,500 or $750?
$75,000.
No, $7,500 would be our cost to reaffiliate with the program.
See, when I approached them a couple of years ago, and when our former city manager approached them, it was all or nothing. They'd run 3 different programs, 4-H, the Master Gardening Program, or whatever, and you couldn't buy into one without buying into all 3. And the price tag was somewhere around $75,000 to $80,000.
I'll let Judy speak to it, but she spoke to them. I did not.
And I talked to the extension director. He went back to Mr. McReynolds, and he thought the best way to do it was on a prorated share based on our population. And this is the figure they've come up with. What they have now is our citizens can still participate in their programs if they're not full now.
Either on a waiting list.
Yeah, they're on a waiting list. So there is a potential for them to do it at no cost to us, but if the waiting list is full, they miss out.
But they'd still be on a waiting list, even with giving them $7,500?
Well, no, with this, I think they automatically get to participate in the program.
At least a slot.
Right. But this came actually from McReynolds, Mr. McReynolds from York County, as our fair share to just join in with their program.
And it would also allow, I'm sorry.
Ready to do a fair share on the extension program. Maybe he's ready to do a fair share on the court system and whatever.
We are still waiting on that from them.
The fair share
He opened the door.
The fair share went up $300 in less than a week. It started out at 72, and then by the end of the week, it went up to 75.
All right, instead of going into the minutia here, let's go ahead and finish, Randy, finish what you want to
Do you have any idea
proceed.
how many people would take advantage of this?
It's about 12 or
In the
13.
report that we've asked for,
Somebody told me 32 in the last couple, 3 years,
32 in the last
We
few
haven't,
years.
well,
2 or 3 years.
there's like 15 or 20 master gardeners in Poquoson, maybe. Somewhere, that's
About
my take.
30-something is what they told me, but I don't
But
know.
we haven't been able to get into a class in recent years because we're on a waiting list, and York County, Gloucester, and all of them all pay money.
All right, go ahead, Randy.
So that's an issue that confronts you. Absent any direction, it will likely not be in my budget, but it'll be certainly something that you all can discuss and add back if you think that's appropriate during your part of the deliberative process and the adoption process. Sorry to sort of go down in the weeds temporarily. I talked about this a little bit, but 2014, we're already working on 2014. That's the way it works. We're actually always looking several years ahead and looking at 2014, trying to determine if things are going to get better or worse. I spoke with Mr. Green earlier today, and he asked me that question. Is 2014 going to be relatively better or relatively worse? That's an excellent question. Or it might have been Mr. Freeman. It was one of the two of you. I apologize. I talked to you both of you this afternoon.
Mr. Freeman,
But what we see in 2014, hopefully, there are not too many amendments to the state budget. And if they're not, then we know what the impacts of the state budget are for year 2 because they have a biennial budget. We do have debt service increases continuing. It doesn't plateau yet. It doesn't really begin to plateau until after 2014 based on the actions that you'd previously taken. And we've got a couple of things that we know are coming at us for sure. TMDL, we talk about that a lot. The budget, the CIP, you'll consider later, has a small nose under the tent amount for TMDL in 2013. By 2014, we may well be in that, whether we like it or not, in a very significant financial way. Also, the consent order work, We've been in a bit of a lull period in terms of the ramp of expenses. That will increase as well as we go out into the future. So there are things that are coming on our board, on our radar for 2014, which promise to make it as challenging or more challenging than 13. Also, just to reiterate one more time, I know you're tired of me saying this, but any one-time strategies that we use, whether it's a short-term refinancing, taking the savings up front, or whether it's a use of general fund balance as a one-time, non-recurring revenue source, really limits our ability to use it in 13. And I think the pie chart that Teresa showed that pretty clearly. That's just the impact in the budget if we were to use the fund balance to the 15% level. And just so that we could round out the four corners, I would note to you also that 2014 is a real property reassessment year as well. We're hopeful that things will turn around. They have not turned, and they have not turned to a positive at this point. I'm hopeful that it will. It seems that the decline has slowed, but it has not reversed itself. So as we think about 2013, and as we will prepare our budget, and as you will deliberate and make your decisions, I thought it was important to just show you this preview of 2014, because the issues that we confront are not going to get more significantly better. They may get different, but I don't think they're going to get better. So I really think we need to take a multiple year view of dealing with these issues, lest we find ourselves having deployed every possible option in a very short period of time and leaving ourselves really only a couple of those first two options in subsequent years. Lastly, just wanted to share with you and share with the members of the public our calendar going forward for the budget process. Tonight is the annual pre-budget public hearing. We hope and anticipate having the budget distributed to you by April the 5th, which in an effort to turn all of Teresa's hair gray, I will be going on vacation that week, so we will need to be done the week before, just like last year. We will present the budget along with the proposed real estate tax rates, fees, etc., on the 9th of April. Shortly thereafter, we will publish the notices for public hearings, and the public hearing will be on the 23rd. As you recall, the city charter gives you a fairly tight window to observe, to deliberate, and to adopt the budget. We have tentatively scheduled consideration for adoption of the budget on the 7th of May. That certainly is not fixed in stone, but the second date there, the date by which the council must adopt the budget, is fixed in stone if in fact we get it to you and present it to you on the 9th. So you've got a certain amount of time under the charter to adopt the budget, or the city manager's budget essentially becomes law. So that's the window. You can certainly add as many work sessions or other discussions as is appropriate for the council, but that's the look ahead, and we're not really asking for direction as much as we're trying to share information, but we would gladly accept any direction that the council may wish to give.
Well, from my perspective and council, you know, I've called pretty much everybody. I think Tracy, I never got a chance to get back with you, but kind of framing the discussion, which Randy's done a great job tonight doing. There's a couple of items on there that we need to be thinking about very closely as a council, not that we have to resolve tonight, but thinking very closely, because I see a couple things that we need to make sure that the manager understands as he puts his budget together. First, I would say to the citizens that I've never seen an easy budget. What I would say is that 2013 and 2014, they seem to get progressively more difficult in these financial times. I guess I share sort of a positive outlook for the city of Poquoson in the fact that we are financially sound, that we do have some amount of reserve. And Randy, I clearly hear what you say about any time that we use that reserve, that's just an added bonus to the next year. What's important for the council to remember is that what we advertise as the budget has to be at the level. In other words, we can't go above what the manager recommends without another advertising and another public hearing. So it's important that if we have distinct ideas on these, that we give him that guidance. Specifically, I know there's some discussion amongst council on fees versus taxes. That would be a substantial change in the tax rate, and it needs to come out in the original manager's budget so that we're not discussing it at the table with the one that's presented, and we're talking about that shift early. Also, I think what I've heard from the majority is that we're all willing to listen to the debt restructuring potential, and recognizing that we will not make a negative financial decision in that. In other words, something that would affect the city's debt ratings or credit ratings, or that would violate our policies. And I think Randy's suggestion that we look at an overarching policy, because I don't see a lot of new financing out there unless the economy turns at a drastic rate. In fact, if I hear anything, it's that we are considering potentially one less school. I don't know, and that's not my position on that. But there's a lot more things that we may not do than that it is that we would. And I think as far as the boat tax, I think that's one thing that we need to be very clear with Randy. It sounds to me like you're planning on putting that in based on the previous discussions. And anything about new programs, we need to send the message clearly to the manager on how to propose the budget to us that we can then maneuver with in regards that we can only go down from his amount. So we need to make sure that we get a proposal that gives us that flexibility. So again, we don't have to have that discussion. We can have some discussion about that tonight. We have another 15 minutes, but I kind of see that as as what we need to help the manager with, as far as how comfortable are you with the different proposals?
The only comment I would have is on the boat tax. And if we don't make it significantly enough the first year to bring in Poquoson owners of boats that keep moored elsewhere, it's not going to make an impact on us. If we're still higher than surrounding areas, I don't think it's going to mean much to them. I could be wrong.
I think the difference would have to be at least what they're paying to moor their boat, say in Virginia Beach or Hampton, as to what it is here. And the difference would have to be at least that amount to make it worthwhile to bring it here.
Agreed.
Yeah. We looked at the progress that's happening down at the end of Ren's Road the other day. And my understanding is there are brokers interested in possibly moving to there when they complete that, if it's a success. But it won't be a success if you don't have any boats there. And when our neighboring cities have zero tax rate, are they really going to come in the first place? And there ought to be some way for us to look at what revenue the city may get if the boats come there to make up for those differences. Certainly there can be a study made of that. If the boats come, there will be car rentals, there'll be groceries bought, fuel bought, services, possibly boat repairs across the creek. Certainly if you get more boats here, they're going to need repairs and work. There ought to be a way to bring that revenue into play with what's lost when we reduce the boat tax. But I also share the thought that if we don't make that a very significant tax reduction, you'll not see it be successful. That's part of we invested in hiring a person to work economic development. And we worked hard to try to get businesses to come here. And if we don't do something to give those businesses enough business to make a difference, we're cutting off our own hand.
I think clearly the message is that Poquoson understands that we need to make a difference on our boat tax rates if we're going to be a waterfront community. And what I would say is that when we're struggling with the tremendous amounts of dollars here that we're working with, I think to incentivize, which is kind of the plan that I'm hearing, is that, we're going to lower it. I don't know. There's no hard numbers being discussed, but let's say we're lowering it 10 to 20% in the first year. That it comes close, and if we see the movement, then it's going to go down another 20%. And then we see other movement, it's going to go down another 20%. And originally, I had suggested that we shape it in something that wouldn't even have to come back before council. But I don't think that we can do that as far as making a decision on taxes, but we can certainly sign a memorandum of intent to do just that. That basically shows, hey, our commitment to shift that tax burden. Because I think in the long term, if we're able to change the trend and we figure out what that bottom number is, that there's the potential to not only keep this revenue neutral, but in the long term, and when I say long term, we're talking 10 to 15 years, that it could actually be a source of higher revenue for the city if we demonstrate that. I also would say that if we need to be careful as far as what we do to make sure that we don't penalize the other taxpayers on this behalf. And that's why I say I think it's something that we have to go into. I think it's something that we get behind via a memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement, that we give that to our marina operators and they can use it. And, we'll follow through on our commitments. I've never seen us not follow through on our commitments, but let's try and keep it as revenue neutral and do it over a brief period of time instead of just a snap decision one way or the other. I think the intent's there, and I think that the operators can use that to their advantage. And I think you'll see that the city of Hampton and city of our competitors are probably not liking their decision not to do completely away with theirs. And they may, in fact, be revisiting theirs. So it gives us a chance to kind of watch the situation, but make a commitment. And I'm all behind that commitment.
I know last summer, when one of our work sessions, we had the report of how much revenue we get from the boat tax and what each penny brings in as part of that revenue. That would help us make I think, a more informed decision if we had that data in front of us to know just how much money we're talking about potentially reducing revenue by.
It's about $300K, wasn't it?
That was the combined number between the RVs and the boats.
300?
The budget for the current year, I believe, is $130,000 for boat tax. The rate is $1.50. So it's not quite $1,000 per penny, but it's in that neighborhood. It had been higher than that. We've seen a reduction in that yield on that particular tax through the recession. People are getting rid of their boats. If they're not getting rid of their boats, they're certainly not replacing their boats as often, so the value of the base is shrinking. And this is also, if you ultimately accept this in a couple of months, it's designed to sort of maybe restart that as well.
One of the things I think we're going to see, and I've talked to a couple of people lately who have indicated they want to downsize their boats because of the cost of fuel. It is really prohibitive with some of the larger boats that people have had for years, and now they're saying, I can't use it, so I might as well get a smaller one that I can use, and obviously that's a lower value. So I think that's
why I say I think we have to be careful before we just transfer it over, but I'm all for incentivizing. And I think that gets the help of the people that are most aided by that incentivization, and that is the marina operators themselves. It gives them the tool and something they can push with, while it doesn't give us another hit on what's already a challenge to us. So,
One other thing,
Go ahead.
I got some information from Randy, Teresa, and Graham today. And all of y'all know that I'm not a real proponent of fees. At least the property taxes are tax deductible for those that itemize. And one thing I'd like for us to consider is a tax increase to replace the utility fund, which is the sewer fund. And we have the ability now to assess the land at a different rate than the improvements, the houses. So that people that just own property are not paying for a service they're not getting. And the fact that the trend seems to be, Randy's got that to hand
This
out.
is,
You know,
this is the
trend
spreadsheet that
seems to
Mr.
be
Green
that
is
the land values are going up
referring
and home
to.
values are going down. Randy estimated that it would take a total, and this includes the shortcoming that we take from the general fund every year. So we know that the sewer fund is not paying for itself to start with. Right now, it's $50 every 2 months, which everybody pays $300 a year,
It's flat rate.
flat rate. Randy estimates it takes $15,254,000 to cover the general fund transfer we do every year and what it costs to actually maintain the sewer. That would be an increase on just the improvements or just the houses of 24 cents. Now keep in mind that's 24 cents increase in taxes, but you're not going to be paying the $50 every 2 months that you're now paying. The break-even point then becomes a home valued at $125,000. $125 unless you're going to pay the $300 or less. Once you get above $125,000, you're going to pay more than you are now. But like I say, it's tax deductible for those that itemize their taxes, which I think is probably the majority. So I'd like for us to look at that too, and that, of course, that would have to be in the advertisement so that if we decide to go that way, we're not increasing the tax rate as it's advertised.
Have we looked at how much we would have to increase those fees to make that a standalone fee like it's supposed to be, according to the current definition?
Well, I think that's going to be in Randy's budget.
I intend to have that in my recommended budget. The plan to make our self-supporting fees self-supporting would include the fee increases necessary to meet our base expenses. So we haven't calculated that yet in answer to your question. The one additional point, if I could make a couple. Mr. Green correctly summarized the housing value break-even point. I would note that this would be all improved property in the city. So commercial properties would also be subject to the 24-cent increase and would see their what they currently pay going down. But we've begun looking at that. We began looking at that today. If it is the council's desire, I can structure the advertisement in such a way as to allow you sufficient legislative room in your decision-making process to consider this option without another advertisement or public hearing. I would note that we would need to know that likely prior to April the 1st so we can construct the ad and get it in on time. I would note also to you, as you will recall when we discussed this last spring, that the estimated cost to reprogram the Bright system to accommodate this was $40,000. We would need an appropriation if you wanted to do this. We also need sufficient time between your decision and when we need to get the bills out and the land book run. And I'm not sure exactly when the land book runs, but I believe, is Graham behind me? Graham, would you like to speak to that? If that's okay,
Yes,
Mayor?
that's fine.
Runs October 1st.
Okay.
He said, you'll have to
Time
repeat
is not
that
a-
because they didn't hear that at home.
What the commissioner said was October 1st, so time would not be a problem in this process. We would simply need to identify the $40,000 for the programming change.
And so it would cost us $40,000 more to add it to the tax structure of the property.
The first time to
One time.
to reconfigure our software in order to bill a bifurcated bill, property and improvements.
Could I ask two quick questions that have nothing to do with that particular thing? When you were talking about the impacts on the budget, major items, is there a major impact, anything comparable to what the schools are going to have with the VRS contribution?
The city's VRS and group life contribution, and it really comes in two flavors. One is general fund, and the other is, it also affects some of the self-supporting funds. But I believe our combined number is 420?
427.
427. So that's the number on top. The school's number, I think, exceeds 500,000.
Yeah.
So together, we're approaching $1 million just on VRS.
Okay. Yeah, and the other thing was the fuel cost that looks like it's going up again, and that may have another impact on operations.
I'm glad you brought that up. The $1.07 million that we're estimating above the 15% guideline includes that fuel reserve that you've built into the budget that thus far this year you haven't needed. Should you find that you need that for any reason, or there be impacts, that's just another draw on the same amount of money.
Okay, thank you.
So if we don't use that, that's a possible surplus at the end of the year?
Yeah, that's
correct?
in that number. It's
Right.
in the
It's in the
1.07.
That was based on $3, wasn't it? Now we're looking at...
It was based on four.
At four?
It was based on the prospect of going to $4 gas, which we've not done yet, although I read something as early as this week. We may be there in just a couple of months.
Yeah.
But I also read that they expect it to be a very limited duration. That makes no sense to me, but it is something that I read this past
It
week.
normally transitions, as I recall, between when they retool from fuel oil back to gasoline, they go through kind of a shortage.
Yeah.
So,
And if possible, I'd like to keep that master gardener option open to see if there's anything we can do with that. It seems like there's some interest in town about that.
With Master Gardener question, I'm leaning the same way as Carrie. Can we charge fees to the people to at least cut that cost back?
I don't believe that we could charge them because they would be participating in the cooperative extension program. I don't know whether the cooperative extension program charges fees or not. Judy, do you
But
know?
it wouldn't help our number even if they did.
That's correct.
What we would probably get back, Tracy, would be service to the community as they work towards, their
Yeah.
Master Gardener badge or whatever, is that they had to do some kind of a project within the city, or could do a project within the city.
Right. Which may translate into some TMDL help with, potentially. So that's the one thing they could, I was thinking, I don't know.
well, if we could take that as a TMDL credit,
Right, right.
I will go for it. If not, I'm going to tell you, I think that the stance should be, because it's hard to allow a new program when we're cutting, basically our employees and everybody else are really suffering, including the school system. And especially if there will be others that we have not funded for quite some time, other needs such as Master Gardener. So I would be for it only if there's some strategy that it can fit in the TMDL thing. And I would also remind council that we need to give the manager some guidance on funding for TMDL in his budget proposal. My personal opinion, and that's all it is that we should we should carry a line item for it, and we should minimally fund it at the manager's discretion, but we should not be funding it at a high level when there's still so many questions out there.
There are a lot of surrounding areas that have passed off a lot of the TMDL funding as part of a fee or a tax or whatever else. And I don't know whether you have that included in your budget or you're doing a hands-off approach this year.
The capital improvements program draft, which will be subject to public hearing later, speaks to $150,000 in funding conceptually for next year. Again, we're tucking the corners in the best we can, but that's in there as a working number. Remember that the initial estimates that we got were $6 million a year for 15 years. The number of years hasn't changed. We're just a year plus into it, so now we're at 14 and actually 13 and some change. I expect that as long as the TMDL emphasis remains at the federal level the way it is now, by the time we get to 2014, many of these issues that the mayor has talked about in terms of not yet being able to articulate measures, strategies, outcomes at the federal level that matriculates down to us will be answered. So the conceptual budget which Ellen has requested for next year, which will be part of my deliberative process and then yours, is $150,000 to go to several million.
And we also have that
Quickly.
joint House bill that is looking at perhaps saying that TMDL is unconstitutional under amendment.
Yeah.
Or tasking the Attorney General to,
Yeah.
and that's why I said I would tell you that I don't think that we need to include $150,000 worth of funding. If we're going to do that, I'd rather just wipe out the boat tax and move on. But, you know, I know, poor guy. But
I share that opinion.
I would tell you that we don't need to not carry a line item and not do anything in that regard. But I don't think that $150,000 is something that we need to commit right yet to that effort. And, but again, so it sounds to me like council needs to go off and think about, in particular, the taxes versus fees, the master gardener, and I guess if you can find out from Ellen if there's any discussion about taking potential credit for TMDL.
I can tell you that it's not yet on the federally approved strategy list.
I would say that we try and get it on that, but I hate to start up a new program. And then the boat tax, you know, whether you want to do away with, leave it as is, do away with it on a schedule, or do away with it all at one time. And then we're waiting for feedback from the bond council on potential refinancing options or restructuring of debt. Let me just say it that way. Instead of refinance, it's basically a restructure.
Is there some way we can semi-actively pursue what costs may be gained by reducing the boat tax so that we know how big of a step we can take in that direction and expect revenues to come in as a result of the tax decrease?
In other words, do you have an idea of...
Is there someone we can go talk to, or is it something we go out on our own and go talk to, find out other communities who went to zero on their boat taxes, what additional business showed up as a result of the boat showing up? You know, if you have $1 million boat, or if you have a $300,000 boat, and you have a choice to put it someplace we have to pay $15,000 a year taxes or zero taxes, that's a pretty clear decision on what you're going to do.
Well, to go to zero, I think you have that number. Is that correct? Or approximation of it.
We certainly know what the revenue...
You would actually
taxes
have
are.
to have sales tax and equal to sales on...
At 1% sales tax, how much sales would you need to make and to get $126,000? If I wasn't on TV, I'd sit and do the math real quick, but so you can run into that. I know of no impact study that talks about how much groceries transient voters. They may exist out there. We, at this point, and we'll do whatever the council wants us to do, but at a 10% reduction theoretically on that rate, we're talking about $12,000 or $13,000. I'd hate to expend a great deal of resources or time trying to shine that. If you're looking at dropping it to 50% out the chute potentially, maybe that's more important. But I doubt that we're going to be able to go to our neighbors and get an after-action impact study. They may exist and we can ask, but I'm unaware of them. I did, with the Wren's Roads project specifically, I have requested a list of boats and values they anticipate coming. I haven't received that yet. If I had that, I could begin an analysis, because obviously it begins with what boats we don't have now, as opposed to what boats we have now. And I just don't have anything to work from. I'm
And
sorry.
also would impact who would buy new boats relative, to the boats they have now. It may not have to be $1 million boat, it can be a $10,000 boat.
It may well be that the recession would really retard that buying choice for lots of people. We may not clearly understand the impacts of this until we get on the other side. And they may surprise us very positively at that point.
Okay. Anything else? Hard decisions, hard budget, and guess we'll take up the legislative agenda at a future meeting.
Ken?
And if nothing else, then we'll go ahead and move to the regular session.
I just wanted to ask, can we put both of these on the city website, a link on the website? Can we ask Mr. Groot to endorse if we can use his in the TV?
You're just looking for a link to it,
Yes.
not on a.
Our materials are on our website, or they should be. This
The slideshow.
Places like the softball.
Jessica was putting something on today, I'm not sure what it was, I'll check in the morning.
Okay.
if it was distributed as part of the agenda, our normal protocol would be, yes, it should already be there. If it's not, we'll make sure that it is, and we'll make sure it's the updated version. I am sure that they have absolutely no concern at all about the posting of this. It was presented at a public meeting, and we've got the link. In fact, they sent it to us, so we can link that as well. That'll be
Thank
no
you.
problem at all.
Okay. And we'll close the work session and move to regular session.